work with the, or let's say it's going to be available on the MS Teams as well. So if we're talking about the module A, or let's say what are some important points, let's say things for the module itself. Module A, as you might remember, would include only 4 learning objectives, right? So you will have you have to explain the basic framework of the international relations. Learning objective A2 asks you to outline the main actors of IR, and here we spoke about the nation states, we spoke about the non-state actors such as United Nations, supranational organizations, regional groupings, business organizations, civil society, and NGOs. Then we also outline realism, idealism, realism, liberalism, and Marxism, and idealism as part of it. We are going to skip this learning objective because this is also included in Module D. So tomorrow we're going to go through the topic itself, and then we have our last topic here is define globalization, outline the globalization, and describe globalization from the realist and liberal perspectives. Now, in terms of how you have to approach the revision of this particular module, first and foremost, what you have to understand is that in semester 2, module A, as a standalone question, might actually also has little chances to be there. However, the topics for module A will most likely be integrated, or say you will be most likely able to integrate it in some other modules or some other or some essays and so on. So your ability to actually integrate these topics will play a major role of what exactly, I'll say, how will you be marked for your essay, for your answers. So in terms of the topics themselves, let me try to manipulate this thing, right? So main focus in module A, what you could work out with it. So first and foremost, you need to know the definition of IR, right? So if we're talking about the definition of IR, you have it in your revision notes. So IR is could be defined as a study of relationships among the states and state and non-state actors. You could also say that international relations focuses on the activity of those non-state actors and or state and non-state actors and the outputs they have. In terms of other things from the framework, you could also talk about the history of international relations as a field of study. You could say that it developed after the World War I. And it had the main focus to understand the reasons behind conflicts and ways to avoid new conflicts. It could be integrated, or say IR as a field of study could be integrated in that idea of theoretical idea of liberalism, which focuses on cooperation, or say on the topics or ideas of cooperation and a creation of some institutions that could control the relationships between the states. Another thing which you could talk about is that there are two major schools in the in IR, and one of them is the American school and the European school. So you could say that if we're talking about the American school, you could say that American school would focus mostly on the United States as the major actor of international relations, and it actually supports that idea of of Americanism, and it also supports the idea of the unipolar world. If we're talking about the European school, then you could say that the European and post-colonial schools are focusing on the idea of the multipolarity, and would focus on the development of new actors in international relations, their importance, the importance of non-state actors, and so on and so forth. Another thing which you have to grasp as part of your module A, and I'm just going to move a little bit down here, is the levels of analysis approach. So in this case, you're going to we'll say, why do you need to know the levels of analysis approach? First and foremost, levels of analysis approach is going to help you to identify the actors, and second, it's going to help you to identify the correct theories. Right, so if we're talking about the levels of analysis approach, we have the individual level of analysis, which mainly focuses in terms of actors. It mainly focuses on the individuals, leaders, scholars that play a major role in international relations. In terms of domestic level of analysis, you're going to focus on, also you're going to analyze the activities or certain interest groups, political parties, the activity of the government, and so on and so forth. Then in terms of interstate level, you're going to focus on the state-to-state relations, and global level, you're going to focus on the multinational corporations, activity of multinational corporations, terrorist organizations, and intergovernmental organizations. Now, how you can link it to the theories, right? So, in terms of individual level of analysis, you're going to have feminism, postmodernism, as theories that more or less focus on individuals or political leaders. For domestic level of analysis, you're going to have peace studies. Somewhere peace studies also analyze the global level of analysis, but mostly they do analyze the events that are happening on the individual level of analysis. So domestic level of analysis is going to have, let's say, as theories, you can apply peace studies, you could apply constructivism, and you could also speak about the concept of democratic peace promoted by liberalism. All this goes to the domestic level of analysis. Then we have interstate level of analysis, and in this case you only have two theories here, realism and liberalism, or liberal institutionalism. And we are going to discuss this tomorrow, right? So tomorrow at 12:30 we have the past paper practice for this module, and at 4 o'clock I'm going to do an overview of the theories of international relations. So I'm going to speak about the theories of IR from the perspective of levels of analysis, right? So on the interstate level, or the relationships between the states, you have realism and liberalism, right? And then on global level of analysis, we have Marxist theories. Okay, so for example, if you're talking about postmodernism, you said that part of postmodernism is post-colonialism and post-structuralism. So you're going to have this feminism and postmodernism as two theories that would focus on the analysis of political leaders, the impacts of them on foreign policy or on global level of analysis. You're also going to look into some small groups, that their activity and so on. Then peace studies and constructivism and democratic peace as part of the liberalism is going to focus on domestic level of analysis, right? In this case, you can apply it, let's say, to describe and, like, for example, if you're going to have the topic of foreign policy decision making, you can apply it, and you have to explain the domestic influences. You can apply it. You can apply the constructivism, or you can explain it from the perspective of constructivism, or you can explain it from the perspective of liberalism or that democratic peace concept. And then global level of analysis, you're going to have Marxism as one of the theories that explains those global events. And specifically, if you want to focus on the explanation of terrorism as an event in 21st century, then you will have to explain it from the perspective of Marxist theories. Now, there is certain dimension of the peace studies that focuses on global level of analysis as well. And in this case, if you want to explain, for example, the activity of United Nations as a global structure, then you can work it out here, or you can explain it from this perspective. That's it for the levels of analysis approach. Now, for the first semester, you actually had to apply this levels of analysis approach. You had to look into, or let's say, you had to explain it as part of your essays. In the second semester, it actually you can actually use it as a tool to add more things in your essays. And definitely, if, for example, you will analyze a particular event, or if you're going to analyze a particular issue in IR, this is going to help you to at least focus on the right actors of international relations. Now, we also skip the topic of collective goods problem, right? So we discussed collective goods in the first semester. Right, so collective goods problem, if someone can recall the definition, maybe John, you could tell us what is collective goods, the definition of collective goods?
Sure. When it comes to the collective goods problem, it's the trouble of having to abide by the group's or the collective's norms or rules, and being able to punish them easily if one of the members deviate from that group.
All right, yeah, that's really true. So one thing which you have to remember, that collective goods problem, let's say, works with, let's say, is part of the liberal perspective. So, for example, if you have to explain liberalism, you can easily explain collective goods problem as part of liberalism. Then you have, let's say, the idea that the collective goods problem can be sorted out in three ways, right? So there are three principles in sorting out the collective goods problem. The first one is the principle of dominance. And in this case, we're going to have, we're at the core of the, let's say, finding a solution for the problem is to have an hierarchy in terms of power. So we'll have power hierarchy, and in this case, we're going to have one or two powers that can dominate the world system, and they will make everyone, I would say, they will force, or let's say, they will establish a world system which would force everyone else to follow their agenda. And as an example, you could speak about Cold War. Okay. Then another principle on how the collective goods problem can be sorted is the principle of dominance. Sorry, reciprocity. So in this case, we're going to talk. We're going to say that reciprocity would solve the collective goods problem by rewarding some positive behaviors, right? So we discussed about that idea of interdependence and that the countries or the states are going to actually join some groups, like for example World Bank, International Monetary Fund. They're going to join some initiatives, like for example initiatives on climate change, and if they're going to follow this directives, then they're going to be rewarded. So they're going to have incentives, or they're going to have support from the international community. If they're not going to follow the directives of the international community or the decisions, for example, of United Nations, then they're going to be punished. And this punishment will actually be done through sanctions. So in let's say after the Cold War, one of the main tools, let's say, and actually during after the World War II, one of the main tools of the states to influence the behavior of other states and make them follow their agenda is to apply sanctions. So in this case, you can, like I think Faisal talked about the sanctions, the impact of the sanctions on Iraq. So you could actually discuss here some economic implications, like this could result on, let's say, economic hardships, or this could make a country to follow actually the directives. We can give the example of Libya. You can give example of South Africa as part of this principle of reciprocity. In terms of rewarding the positive behaviors, let's say the newest example you could give and you could research around would be the COVAX initiative, or let's say the initiative taken by the states, by the international community to, let's say, to contribute financially at the development of like a fund which would support the production of a vaccine, and would further help most of the countries to have access to those vaccines, and to let's say ensure that their population is vaccinated on time, and that would actually in long run reduce from those economic impacts. So if you want to research more around it, you can just have a look at what COVAX initiative means. I'm sure at least John knows about it, because you wrote about the COVID, you wrote about this comparative analysis between the COVID-19 effects and the what do you call it, the financial crisis. Did you hear about it, John?
Yes, Miss. It's the international initiative meant to give vaccines to underdeveloped countries, or to countries who can't really procure the COVID vaccine. I should also note that it's also meant to depoliticize the vaccine providing process. So rather than states giving or donating vaccines to other states as a form of vaccine diplomacy, it also depoliticizes it by not making one state giving another state vaccines, but rather
All
as
right.
an initiative. Yeah.
Technically, yes, the initiative, yeah, the initiative itself, yes, it follows this noble idea. However, if you look into I'll say if you just look into it in a different perspective, you're going to see that even those developing or underdeveloped countries, first and foremost, they have to be part of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, and they need to, let's say, to contribute with a certain quota or a certain amount of money, or to take a loan from international or from World Bank to have access to this initiative. Yes, the countries can join, and they will have that support, and they will be provided with the vaccine. But the other side of it is that those countries that can, let's say, all the countries that are part of this initiative need to also contribute from their side with a certain amount of money. Okay. Qatar is part of it. I think, if I'm not mistaken, John, you can correct me, there are around 78 countries that signed the initiative itself, but the initiative is, let's say, would be available to all the other countries. That's the latest data I actually had before. Maybe there are more nowadays. Yeah, so we were talking about the principles of IR. So we have dominance, reciprocity, and the third principle, which is also very important and plays a major role lately, is the principle of identity. So if you look into if you would look into the module F, we discussed about the conflicts of identity, and this is where, let's say, we have to mention, or say we can actually analyze these conflicts from the perspective of that principle of identity. What is the principle of identity about? The principle of identity would look into identities of different participants in the community. So it argues that, for example, the members of the same religious group will always be faster to support each other than, or the members of similar political systems will be closer to support each other, or else if we're talking about the ways they can sort out the collective goods problem, they're going to focus on the idea of peacekeeping, foreign aid, and also we could talk about the let's say contributions, or let's say collaboration in terms of issues of health issues. Okay, so for instance, if we're talking about the peacekeeping, we discussed it in module G. We said that let's say the international community took on board the agenda of on peace in 90s, right, which would focus on a development of an international, let's say, army that could actually support, let's say, in terms of conflict resolution. So, for example, even if a local conflict would be initiated, let's say the major role of the peacekeeping mission is not to take sides of the conflict, but to protect the civilians, right? And that would be, let's say, in a broader perspective, that would be part of building up a global identity, where let's say, even if a country or a state is not directly affected by the issue, they are still able to contribute. So, for instance, if we're talking about the peace, the agenda for peace, or that idea of peacekeeping in specifically, we have a situation where the richer countries would contribute financially to make this initiative work, and the poorer countries will normally contribute with manpower. So, for instance, if you look into the let's say members of the peacekeeping missions, you will mostly have let's say recruiters from India, Bangladesh, I think even Philippines. Again, John, if I'm mistaken, please correct me, because this is what I've researched lately. You'll have a lot of representatives, or let's say of recruiters from African countries, whereby, let's say, the government is not able to contribute in terms of financial contributions, but they still are able to contribute with designated personnel, which is trained, which is paid for the job they're doing. Okay, so that is actually, I'll say, by having this kind of approach to the issue, that allows a building up a global identity where most of the people actually are supporting the initiative itself, or the global community supports the initiative itself. In terms of health, as you could see, the latest developments with the global pandemic, you can see that most of the countries, like for example, the major agency that works as a coordination body is the World Health Organization, right? The World Health Organization cannot formally interfere in the internal affairs of the state, but it mostly works as an as a coordinator of certain initiatives. It also, let's say, initiates certain directives which could be followed by the states in order to prevent the spread of a pandemic. So in terms of health, if you look into the activity of states as part of this of tackling the global pandemic, you could also talk, you could actually talk about it from the perspective of principle of identity. If you look in the measures taken by different states, like for example the travel restrictions, vaccination process, let's say participation of the governments in the COVAX initiatives and so on, you can actually you can classify it as an as a buildup of a new identity, right? Foreign aid falls under the same concept of identity. Unfortunately, foreign aid was included in module I, which was removed from your syllabus because of the COVID situation, and we would have discussed the concepts behind the foreign aid in depth. But so far, you have two examples which you can focus on and which you can develop. You can research examples on it, and so on and so forth. Any questions about the collective goods problem? All right, I can move on then. And okay, so another thing which module A, or which we took as part of the module A, was the topic of issues in IR. And as far as I remember, we did talk about migration and refugees as part, I think, for John and Jumana in your group. I distributed some short case studies where you had to read about migration and refugees, some others issues in IR. Mohammed, Faisal, he wasn't there yet, but Mohammed, I think in your group did the same. So if we're talking about issues in IR, you can see that we discussed about terrorism in depth. We actually had terrorism, or say the history of terrorism and terrorist groups in module C, and then we discussed about human rights in module G. We also discussed about the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction in module F. So you actually could see that module A just gives you that introduction to the topics, but later on you have full modules, the full learning objectives that actually discuss these situations in depth. Now, in terms of actors of IR, this is another important topic that actually you have to, let's say, you will not have questions on it in terms of short answer questions. This is less likely to happen. These questions usually would come in the first semester as short answer questions, and you actually had experienced it this year. That the focus was on supranational organizations, and you had to talk about the European Union as a supranational organization. If you remember, I've distributed topics. You had to prepare presentations. If you forgot about those presentations, maybe you can return back to the folder, the classwork folder, and have a look at it more. So in terms of this particular module, what do you need to actually, or say this particular learning objective, what do you need to grasp for the semester 2 exam? Well, first and foremost, you need to know the difference between the types of the actors of IR. Right, so if you remember it well, we have two types of actors of IR. The first type is states, and second type is the non-state actors. Right, so in terms of the state actors, we talked about the nation states, or the state, as a major actor of international relations. So first and foremost, you need to know the definition. So you could say that the states are political entities that are inhabited by citizens and share some same language, history, ethnicity, governmental system, and so on. Then you need to know the characteristics. So we said that in order for state to exist, it should actually have the 6 characteristics. First and foremost, it should have a geographically well-defined territory. This is why we discussed in module G the principle of territoriality, that the territory of the state is one of the most important components of sovereignty. It needs to actually be a sovereign state. It should respond to that idea of sovereignty. So if we're talking about sovereignty, that would involve the idea that there is no outside power that could influence the internal affairs of the state. It should have a fully functioning government who is able to take decisions, and other people, or say the population of the state, would follow these regulations. It also has to have clearly defined boundaries, and the population should be, let's say, should follow the directives of governments. And one of the important topic, or say a characteristic of the states, is to share the same language. Usually, let's say, why do you need to know this for the second semester? First and foremost, for example, if you're going to have a topic related to identity conflicts, you might actually, and for example, you need to discuss, for example, the issue of Uyghurs in China, right? Why the Chinese government is actually having those strict policies against Uyghurs. Then you could actually imply that idea of territoriality, or the sovereignty. So for example, if the Uyghurs, if the Chinese government would allow the Uyghurs to have an autonomy, or let's say, or to have to follow on their idea of self-determination, that would actually put under threat the entire concept, or the entire politics of China, in terms of having a sovereign state, for the simple reason that First and foremost, China is a I would say it's multinational country, but it does have groups with different ethnic identities, with different religious identities, and one of the main reasons why China ended up having almost a 50 years civil war was because there was a huge discrepancy between the visions of within the territory itself. So giving a little bit more autonomy to the Uyghurs would put under threat the entire country, right? Now there is, in this case, yes, you could apply here that religious component, but in case of Uyghurs, the religion is just taken on board as a label by the non-state actors, non-state NGOs, in order to, let's say, promote that idea of advocacy. Right. Now, I'm not supporting the Chinese government in terms of their actions, but I'm just explaining you from the perspective of a state, why would the state take particular actions in a particular situation. What else do you need to know about the states? First and foremost, for example, if you're going to discuss about the states, you have to also and especially if you're going to talk about conflicts, you will definitely need to you'll definitely need to explain the idea of that, the failed and rogue states, right? So you need to discuss about the typology. So like, for example, if you're going to talk about the one of the reasons for the second Gulf War, or the US-led invasion in Iraq in 2003, then you're going to definitely mention that policy, or the US policy on the rogue states, or let's say the pariah states, right, where US classified Iraq, Iran, and North Korea as countries, or let's say as states that do not follow the international system. So if, for example, what is the use of this information for the second semester is that you could explain certain reasons, or let's say you could explain causes of particular events. Yes, in the first semester you were asked just to talk about characteristics, or let's say to work with the characteristics of particular actors, but in the second semester, aside of a definition, you need to be able to combine the information from different modules. So for example, this is module, if I'm not mistaken, C5, right? So for instance, if you will talk about Syria in your essay, and you're going to discuss the reason of the let's say the current situation in Syria, if you're going to you can discuss it from the perspective, you can classify Syria as a failed state for now, because it's not able to control the territory, it's not able to protect their citizens. It has a terrorist activity on their territory, and so on and so forth. Or if you are going to discuss, for example, about Lebanon as a case study to explain some humanitarian emergencies on their territory, then you could bring in the idea of I will not say a failed state, but at least is in a fragile state with which actually is having a high level of corruption. There are also some non-state actors that are active on the territory of the state, and some other factors that don't allow it to be a successful state and bring in some, let's say, goods and welfare, a high level of welfare system in there. Then, for the non-state actors, we did discuss about the IGOs, And in this case, you have the United Nations as one of the examples, which we, let's say, we had at least 2 sessions on. You had the opportunity to discuss about the history. We also discussed about the structure. So this could work for essays in Module G. Activity in terms of conflict resolution. You also have in your PowerPoints the activity of ECOSOC, or those activities in terms of economic development or sustainable development. This is also important. So if in semester 1 you only had that outline of the topic, in semester 2 you need to be able to link it to learning objective, to the second semester information. So G1, and G2, and G3. That would be those would be the topics that are covered by this module. Then also for the non-state actors, you have supranational organizations. Again, I don't think this is going to come, but you can talk about it. So in this case, you have the European Union. We had a full presentation on European Union. Here you could talk about, for example, the initiatives during COVID. You could also talk about the implication of EU countries in the peacekeeping missions, in the humanitarian aid. And so on. Okay. Then we also discussed about corporations. And we discussed about MNCs and TNCs. And you can link it to learning objective H2, I think, H1 and H2. Okay, so in this case, you're going to, again, you have to know the differences, or say the definition, differences between MNCs and TNCs. Then you might want to also give examples. So you could give the example of Apple or any other organization that will say a multinational corporation that has a global impact. Okay, and then for the terrorist groups, or groups promoting violence, we discussed it in learning objective C6, and then we had it in module F7. I'm not really sure, but this is where it should be. So you have to talk about, let's say in this case, you're going to say what are terrorist groups. And then you have to give examples. And in your, if we're talking about your modules, we took, this is module C, and then you have their Boko Haram, you have ISIS, and you have Al Qaeda. So you need to return to module C to have a look at it. So your ability to what it can help you with in semester 2, it can actually help you with tackling the essays for module F. Okay. For example, for corporations, it will help you to tackle essays in Module H. For the IGOs, it will help you to write down essays in Module G. Okay, so this is how you have to have a look into the learning objectives. Then another group which we discussed as part of your this learning objective is the NGOs, the activity of NGOs. We had it as part of H9, 10, 11, or 10, 11, 12. I'm not really sure about it. So again, you need to know the definition. And in our case, we discussed the NGOs and the topic of human rights. So this learning objective A2 is related to learning to Module G. So it will help you to write the essays for Module G. Okay. Any questions about actors? You're still with me?
Yep.
Yes, miss.
All right. Is it useful what I'm explaining, or you feel it confuses you even more? Sorry, Mohammed? Okay.
It's useful.
All right. So I think Mohammed, what is he waiting for is the topic of globalization, right, Mohammed? This is why I told you to be here today.
Yes.
Okay, so in terms of Module A, the last learning objective, or the learning objective A4, tackles the idea of globalization. Right? So we discussed about 3 types of globalization: the political, economic, and cultural. So in terms of globalization, how can you link it to other learning objectives?
Where's module A?
Sorry?
Module H.
Yes. Okay, so first, what do you have to know in here? First and foremost, of course you have to know the definition, like generic definition. So you can say that globalization is the a process of international integration, which would include the exchange of the world views, products, ideas, or other aspects of culture. So that would be mostly fit to the cultural globalization. Or you can speak about the economic interdependence. So it depends on which definition you can add in, right? Then you have to mention the you have to mention about the some factors, or the triggers of factors that would support globalization, and that would include, let's say, you could speak about the technology, development of technology. You can speak about the economic developments, and in this case you're going to refer to that economic globalization, where let's say thanks to capitalism, the interdependence between the states has increased, and so on. And then you can speak about culture as one of the triggers, and you can also speak about politics. You will also need to include some evidences, and that could be part of your introduction. So you could speak about poverty, you could speak about terrorism, you could, let's say, as examples, you could give terrorism, international trade. Then you could speak about the problem of equality, inequality, okay, and so on. So there are quite many things that you could include in here. Of course, another thing which you could work with is the theories of IR related to globalization, and I mentioned it in our first session. So, for example, liberalism will fully support the process of globalization, and it is actually going to be one, we'll say, even the concept of liberalism itself is actually supporting the idea of economic integration, political, like creation of some institutions or global institutions that would support cooperation and would avoid any kind of, let's say, major conflicts and wars. Then you could talk about realism, and for realism, actually, let's say for classic realism, the idea of globalization is actually something utopic. It doesn't really happen. For the neo-realism, they do accept those intergovernmental institutions, but they do still they do think that the states are going to actually use those institutions as part of their national interest, and therefore globalization itself does not really mean that let's say the problem of anarchy is sorted out. Then Marxism, as I mentioned in the morning, I would say in the afternoon earlier, Marxism is going to focus on the idea that the globalization is going to be the latest stage of capitalism, right? So Marxism is going to emphasize on that idea of equality and inequality, and or let's say on the idea of inequality, and the fact that this the globalization process and the effects of those transnational corporations and the activity of intergovernmental organizations are actually leading to more, let's say, to that issue, or let's say increasing the issue of poverty and so on and so forth. Now, in terms of learning objectives related to, let's say, how you can combine it with the other learning objectives, right? So political globalization is discussed in module G, and you could also talk about it in module F, and that is the non-proliferation of WMD, for example, then counterterrorism. That would actually, I would say, what is, if we're talking about political globalization, we would actually define it to as a growth of a global political order, like so development of like IGOs, right? International law as one of the factors that can bring in together the, let's say, can constitute that conglomerate of laws and regulations which would help the countries to work out certain conflicts, right? The growth of NGOs. We said that NGOs are also influencing the states, and they're playing a major role nowadays in the activity of the states and so on and so forth. So you could technically link it to the political globalization, can be linked to module G, and that is full module G. And somehow with module F, those topics of non-proliferation of WMD and counterterrorism. So you can, let's say, if you have your notes open, you can see that in module A, it's just a brief explanation of what is political globalization, but you could, for example, link it with your essays for module G to explain how, for example, United Nations is actually part of that political process of globalization. Make sense?
Yes, miss.
Okay, perfect. Now, the cherry from the cake that is especially for Mohammed. Mohammed identified it correctly when he said that module economic globalization is mainly related to module H. And when we are talking about module H and that relation with the economic globalization, I'm talking about the full module H. Okay. So what do you have to work out for this particular essay, or let's say for this particular type of globalization, right? So first and foremost, you need to know the definition. So you could say that economic globalization is an increasing economic integration and interdependence of national, regional, and local economics across the world through let's say the cross-border movement of goods and services, technologies, and capital. So once you wrote the definition, if you are confused about those, we'll say, of course, you can talk about the global currency, we'll say the international currency. You could talk about the transnational trade. And in this case, you're going to talk about the World Trade Organization. You're going to talk about the importance of regional trade agreements and so on. So that's, I think that's learning objective H9 and H10. Guys, I'm really not, let me just see. My computer is a bit slow. Yeah. Yeah, so for example, if you want to have it relate, let's say you want to include here the information related to trade, you can talk about the you can include here the H9 and H10, learning objectives H9 and H10. You can also speak about the political intervention in trade, like you can speak about sanctions. This is also part of the global response, or say the part of that globalization process where the economic disputes are not really sorted out through open conflicts, but they are actually, let's say, the states are trying to sort them out by using the, let's say, using sanctions, for example. Then, what else? You could also, if you refer to the economic globalization, you could talk about the Bretton Woods system. You could bring it in here. That would be a good point to make. So you could speak about the International Monetary Fund and World Bank as the two intergovernmental organizations that are actually having a huge input in terms of regulation of financial, I would say, monetary policies and support for the developing and underdeveloped countries. And you could also bring it here, the role of MNCs and TNCs. I don't know if I put it before. No. Okay. So Does it make sense now, Mohammed, how you have to use it?
Yes, miss. Thank you.
Okay. Um, in terms of the cultural globalization, of course you can mention it, but we did not really focus on it. We did not really focus on cultural globalization. You could just mention some ways let's say the culture, or let's say the different identities are would have a role, or let's say would play a role in, for example, in conflicts, for instance, because if we're talking about culture, culture is normally related to identities. You can speak about the globalization of culture in terms of standardization of language, of lifestyle, of media, and so on. And on the other hand, you can also talk about cultural globalization, I would say, as a globalization, where certain um, countries or ethnic groups are actually trying to stick to their own traditions and religion and lifestyle and visions of how the world should work like. So you could give an example of let's say opposition between, for example, the Western type of culture in terms of being more liberalized and having religion as less important in their daily life, compared to, for example, the Muslim population, where religion is part of the lifestyle, is part of the belief system, is part of the let's say political views, and so on and so forth. Um, so that is it for module 8A, to be honest. I don't know if you have any questions. This is available on your own OneNote, so you will be able to access it. Let's say the notes themselves, you will be able to access it in the classwork. Uh, and you'll be able to view them. I've also recorded the session itself, if you want to return back later on it. You have, I don't know, next 5 minutes for questions. If any. No questions?
Miss, how likely is it that a Module H question will appear in the Section B?
Um, 50-50.
50-50. But Module
Yeah.
F and G will will likely appear, right?
Yes, in the past 4 years at least, module F and G were there. This is why I've developed, I would say, I've actually started with the module F and G as, let's say, those standard module essays. I'd say that you could have a look, or let's say closer look, on module E and H as well. I'm not really, let's say, I'd say that it all depends on NCUK, but let's say, whatever I've seen in past papers, the trend in the past papers would demonstrate that um, the essays are built up around those two modules, the F and the G. They're always there. They're